You know the classic startup story? Like, we've all seen the Hollywood movie montage, right?
Oh, yeah. The brilliant founder in a messy garage.
Exactly. They have that sudden lightning bolt eureka moment.
Cue the upbeat soundtrack.
Right. A flurry of coding late into the night, and boom, they're ringing the bell at the stock exchange.
It feels like pure magic.
Ah,
And it's an incredibly seductive narrative, honestly. I mean, we are culturally obsessed with the myth of the overnight success.
But today, for this deep dive, we're taking a massive stack of economic papers and modern startup guides, and we're just throwing it right into the middle of that movie set.
And the data completely ruins the movie, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
There is a statistic from these sources that, honestly, it stopped me cold.
The failure rate.
Yeah. Approximately 60% of all new businesses face major problems or just outright fail in their first 3 years. 60%.
It's a brutal reality check.
And the crazy part is the primary reason they fail isn't a lack of funding or bad luck. It's because founders rush headlong into action without actually checking if there is any real market demand for what they're building.
Right. It's the equivalent of jumping out of an airplane and just, assuming you'll figure out the aerodynamics of a parachute on the way down.
Which is a terrible idea.
A very bad idea. And that is exactly what we are tackling today. Our mission is to sift through all this research to extract the absolute core principles of entrepreneurship.
Right, we're stripping away the mythology.
Exactly. We want to look at how you actually start a business today, and more importantly, how you survive those critical first 36 months.
And to do that, we aren't just going to read you a sterile list of top 10 business tips. We're going to trace the actual life cycle of a startup from the ground up.
Which means we can't start with product development or legal paperwork.
No, we have to start with the psychology. Before you even think about selling something, you have to understand why you are doing it and, well, how an entrepreneur actually processes risk.
From there, we are going to debunk the very dangerous myth of the million-dollar idea.
Which is a big one. And then walk through the unsexy mechanics of setting up your foundation with the sources called Basecamp.
And finally, explore what actually happens the day you open your doors to the public.
Okay, so the psychology is the perfect place to start because the mindset required to survive that 60% failure rate is highly specific.
It is.
But I want to challenge that right away. The sources spend a lot of time on this entrepreneurial mindset, but look at modern Silicon Valley.
Okay, sure.
So much of the current business ecosystem seems entirely built around achieving unicorn status, raising hundreds of millions of venture capital dollars, and, securing a massive payout.
Right.
Isn't the modern definition of an entrepreneur just someone motivated by outsized wealth? Like, why pretend it's about anything else?
Well, it's a very common modern perception.
Yeah.
Especially because the media only highlights the billion-dollar exits, right? But the economic literature firmly pushes back on that.
So,
In the sources, we look at the work of Joseph Schumpeter.
yes.
He was the very first economist to formally recognize entrepreneurship as the primary engine of economic growth. And he was writing about this nearly a century ago.
Right, this isn't a new concept.
No, not at all. And Schumpeter explicitly dismissed material and monetary gain as the prime mover of the entrepreneur.
Which is fascinating.
It is. I mean, if you look at the broad spectrum of businesses today, the bakeries, the mid-sized logistics firms, the local tech agencies, they aren't raising venture capital.
So if it isn't the promise of a yacht, what did Schumpeter believe was driving people to take on these insane failure rates?
He identified two driving forces that go much deeper than money. The first is, and I'm quoting here, the joy of creating, of getting things done, of simply exercising one's energy and ingenuity.
The joy of creating. I love that.
And the second is the will to conquer, the impulse to fight, to succeed for the sake not of the fruits of success, but of success itself.
Success for the sake of success itself.
Wow.
That completely shifts the lens. It moves the focus away from the payout at the finish line and places it entirely on the friction of the process.
Exactly.
You have to actually love the building phase.
You really do. And to sustain that love for the process, the psychological research points to a necessary trait called the internal locus of control.
Right. Let's get into that. That's a fascinating mechanism.
It really is. An individual with an internal locus of control deeply believes that success or failure is dictated by their own efforts and decisions.
So they don't view themselves as a victim of the economy
Right.
or bad luck or external circumstances.
Exactly. They see a gap between how the world currently operates and how it ought to operate. And instead of just complaining about it, they assume the responsibility for closing that gap.
Which ties into another concept in the research, the growth mindset. But the sources define it very specifically in the context of business.
Right, it's not just about learning from mistakes.
Yeah, it's the ability to quickly sense, take action, and get organized, specifically under conditions of extreme uncertainty.
And that uncertainty variable is the absolute crux of it. In a traditional corporate job, you have a map, you know?
Right, you have a job description, a manager, an established product.
Exactly. In entrepreneurship, there is no map. You are in the dark. And when faced with that total lack of structure, a lot of people suddenly realize they might not actually want to be an entrepreneur at all.
Which brings up the entrepreneurial tourist, which is one of the most revealing concepts in this entire stack of reading.
Oh, absolutely. The data suggests that about half of the people who take startup classes or read business books fall into this category.
They're tourists.
Yeah, they are tourists. They like the identity of being a founder. They want the title. They enjoy the networking events.
But they are not prepared to quit their comfortable jobs tomorrow and pour their entire existence into a fledgling, highly risky company.
And we should be clear, there is no shame in being a tourist. Exploring an idea is how you learn.
Right.
But the danger comes when a tourist lies to themselves about their commitment level. Building a business requires a baseline of what the texts call informed passion.
Informed passion, not just blind optimism.
Exactly. It is an all-consuming 24/7 endeavor, particularly in that first year.
So if your motive is just a vague desire for independence, but you lack the capacity for that intense, grueling commitment, the uncertainty will crush you.
Yes. You need to audit your motives brutally before you spend a dime.
So let's assume you, the listener, have done that soul searching. You've audited your motives.
We have the internal locus of control.
Right, the informed passion. And you know you aren't just a tourist. The next massive hurdle that stops people dead in their tracks is sitting around waiting for a revolutionary, world-changing idea.
Ah, the elusive light bulb moment. The belief that you can't start until you've invented the next iPhone.
Yes. And there's an incredibly sharp analogy in the source material from a personal finance book, actually, that explains the psychology behind this trap.
I love this analogy.
It's so good. The author poses a question: why do so many people gain weight after college?
And his answer is that we love to debate minutia.
We do. We will spend hours arguing about whether trans fats are worse than saturated fats, or debating the metabolic differences between the keto diet and intermittent fasting.
Right, we dive into these granular details because arguing about the mechanics of weight loss makes us feel productive.
Exactly. It completely absolves us from doing the actual unsexy, difficult work, which is simply putting the fork down and going for a run.
That is a phenomenal parallel because the exact same avoidance mechanism happens in business, but it's even more deceptive.
Because in business, debating minutia actually looks like real work to the outside world.
Yes, aspiring entrepreneurs will sit in coffee shops endlessly debating subscription models or spending months whiteboarding a blockbuster idea that will disrupt a global industry.
It feels like progress.
But it is entirely a defense mechanism to avoid the vulnerability of actually launching something and facing potential rejection.
It's the illusion of momentum. And the sources tear this apart. One of the papers explicitly states that the initial idea is widely considered the single most overrated element in all of entrepreneurship.
Because an idea in a vacuum has no friction. When we look at the research of Peter Drucker, the legendary management consultant, he established a foundational rule.
Which is?
Effective innovations almost always start small. They are not grandiose. Grandiose plans that aim to revolutionize an industry are mathematically the most likely to fail.
Because they rely on too many untested assumptions.
Exactly.
So if you aren't supposed to sit around waiting for a world-changing idea, how do you actually figure out what to build?
Well, the curriculum for entrepreneurship education outlines a few operational principles that flick this whole myth on its head, starting with the bird in the hand principle.
Right, so instead of looking for a complex external opportunity, you look inward.
You build a solution to a simple problem based strictly on the resources, skills, and network you already possess right now.
And that completely alters your risk profile. By relying on immediate resources, your bird in the hand, you bypass the need for massive external capital or steep learning curves.
Which ties directly into the next operational concept, the affordable loss principle.
This one fundamentally changed how I view risk.
It's a game changer.
Because usually we think of business risk in terms of expected return. Like, if I take out a $100,000 loan, what are the odds I make $1 million?
Exactly. The traditional corporate model relies on predicting the upside. But the affordable loss principle flips that calculation entirely.
Instead of projecting an imaginary massive return to justify a huge risk, you look at your current life and ask what?
You ask, what is the absolute maximum amount of time, money, and social capital I can realistically afford to lose without ruining my life?
Like, maybe that is $5,000 in 6 months of your
Right.
weekends.
You take that affordable loss
Yeah.
and you ask, what kind of experiment can I run with exactly this much runway?
It makes the risk finite. It contains the explosion if things go wrong.
And if the experiment doesn't go exactly as planned, which, let's be real, it won't,
Right.
you apply the limited principle.
And to be clear, the sources aren't just using this as some cheesy motivational poster about staying positive when things get tough.
No, it's a structural strategy. It means designing a business model that is flexible enough to pivot when the market inevitably throws a wrench in your original plan.
It's the difference between rigidity and agility. Like, if you are rigidly tethered to your original genius idea, a market surprise will break you.
But if you embrace the surprise, say, your customers ignore your main product, but obsess over a tiny side feature you built.
You pivot. You focus entirely on that side feature.
Exactly. The consensus across all the data is absolute. Your ability to execute, the adaptability of your team, and finding a clear target market are infinitely more valuable than whatever initial idea got you off the couch.
All right, so you've abandoned the myth of the genius idea. You are working with your bird in the hand. You've calculated your affordable loss.
You're ready to move.
But how do you transition from the theoretical to the tangible? Like, how do you actually build the container for this business?
This is the transition into what the texts call base camp.
Okay.
If building a business is like summiting a mountain, base camp is the staging ground. You don't just close your eyes and start climbing.
You sit down and write out a highly detailed, comprehensive checklist of every unsexy mechanical task required from day one until the day you are legally allowed to process a transaction.
Yes.
And honestly, I hear the word checklist and I immediately think of tax codes, zoning permits, and legal structures.
The fun stuff.
Yeah, right? I'll be honest, getting bogged down in legal paperwork feels like the fastest way to kill the momentum of that joy of creating we just talked about.
I totally get that.
Why can't I just start selling things out of my garage to see if people even want the product and then figure out the complicated legal structures later if the business actually takes off?
I understand the temptation to skip the bureaucracy, but doing that is incredibly dangerous. The sources are unanimous here. That paperwork is not just a hurdle, it is your armor.
Your armor.
The very first thing on that base camp checklist must be choosing and forming a legal entity, like an LLC, an S Corp, or a C Corp.
But how does an LLC actually protect you? Like, what is the mechanism there?
Okay, so an LLC, or limited liability company, creates what is known as a corporate veil.
Oh, corporate veil.
Think of it as a legal and financial firewall between you and the business. If you just start selling out of your garage as a sole proprietor, you and the business are the same entity.
Right, so if the business gets sued or goes bankrupt, the creditors can come directly after your personal savings, your car, and your home.
Exactly. But if you have an LLC, that lawsuit hits the firewall and stocks. They can liquidate the business's assets, but your personal life is shielded.
Which means choosing the right structure isn't just a tax decision.
No.
It's a foundational risk management strategy. And the sources note you have to choose this entity based on your long-term vision.
That's a crucial point.
If your ultimate goal is to raise venture capital and give equity to private investors,
An LLC is eventually going to cause massive friction.
right, and a sole proprietorship is completely out of the question. You'd likely need a C Corp.
You have to align the initial foundation with the ultimate architecture of the house you want to build.
Precisely. And speaking of that firewall, there is a mechanical rule in the sources regarding banking that is so critical it cannot be overstated.
Oh, I remember this.
From the very first dollar, you must never, ever use the same bank for your business accounts and your personal accounts.
I noticed this. They don't just mean keeping separate checking accounts.
No, they mean entirely different banking institutions. Do not open your business credit card at the same bank that holds your family's personal savings.
Why is that physical separation so vital?
Because if you mix funds or keep them under the same institutional roof, you risk piercing the corporate veil we just talked about.
Oh, wow.
If a bank sees irregularities, or if the business defaults on a line of credit, the institution might freeze all accounts associated with your name.
Including your personal ones.
Exactly, to satisfy the debt. Keeping them in entirely separate institutions ensures that a financial catastrophe in your business doesn't accidentally trigger a freeze on your ability to buy groceries.
That is such a practical, mechanical safeguard. But while founders should be paranoid about their banking, the texts point out they are often paranoid about the wrong things.
Yes, specifically their intellectual property.
Right. There is this huge trap where a founder gets a concept, and before they even have a prototype, they spend half their affordable loss on lawyers, non-disclosure agreements, and patents.
Terrified that someone is going to steal their idea.
Exactly. It's a massive misallocation of resources.
Mhm.
And it stems directly from that myth of the million-dollar idea. They think the idea is the value.
But the research argues you should spend far less time protecting your idea and far more time perfecting it through execution.
Ideas are cheap. Execution is the actual moat that protects your business.
And as you are executing and building this prototype in Basecamp, you have to budget for the ultimate reality check.
This is where optimism goes to die.
It really is. The experts provide a standard rule of thumb for financial projections that is completely brutal, but absolutely necessary to survive.
Assume you are going to sell half as much as you think you will, and assume your costs are going to be twice as high as you projected.
Half the sales, double the costs.
The cognitive bias of optimism in founders is staggering. You have to build a buffer against your own optimism.
So if your spreadsheet says you need $50,000 to launch, you need to secure at least $75,000.
That extra 50% is your survival runway. It buys you the time to navigate the inevitable surprises.
Those lemons.
Right, without having to close up shop before you even get traction.
Okay, so you have your firewall in place. Your personal assets are shielded at a different bank. You've budgeted for the reality check.
You've done the work.
You are finally ready to step out of Basecamp. What happens the day you unlock the doors and actually launch?
Well, the day you launch is the day every single assumption you made in Basecamp collides with reality.
Boom.
Exactly. Up until that moment, your business model, your pricing, your product design, they were all just guesses.
The most critical role of an entrepreneur on day one is to stay incredibly close to the customer.
You have to monitor every daily operation and observe exactly where reality deviates from the business plan.
It is exactly like a scientific experiment. Before the doors open, your entire business is just a hypothesis.
You think people will pay $20 for this service?
But the customer is the scientist who actually conducts the experiment and proves if your theory is correct.
And remember that 60% failure rate we talked about at the beginning. The antidote to becoming part of that statistic is aggressive market validation. You have to listen to the data the market feeds back to you.
And what the market ultimately dictates is your bottom line. There is a very blank quote in the sources from George Cloutier, a turnaround expert.
So this quote.
He states, "Profits aren't everything, they're the only thing."
It's a stark contrast to where we started.
Right. Wait a minute. We need to reconcile this because 20 minutes ago we were talking about Joseph Schumpeter and how true entrepreneurs are driven by the joy of creation, not the money.
I know.
How do we square Schumpeter's theory with Cloutier saying profits are the only thing?
It seems contradictory, but they are talking about two different systems entirely.
Okay.
Schumpeter is talking about the internal motivation required to endure the hardship. Cloutier is talking about the external physics of a functioning business.
Ah, internal versus external.
Right. A business is an economic organism. Cash flow is its oxygen. You might be motivated by the sheer joy of creating a beautiful, sustainable clothing line, but if you ignore your margins, fail to make sales, and run out of cash, the business dies.
Internal passion cannot defy external economic physics.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. You cannot experience the joy of creating if the bank forecloses on your operation. The profits buy you the privilege of continuing to create.
They absolutely do. And ensuring those profits requires tremendous operational discipline, particularly regarding growth.
Right, because one of the biggest killers of young businesses is premature scaling.
The texts warn heavily against expanding before you validated your core offering.
The example given is highly practical. If you start an e-commerce website to sell shoes, your only job is to prove that your specific method of selling shoes actually works and is profitable.
You do not start adding handbags, sunglasses, and belts to your inventory just because you think you should be bigger.
You don't build a massive department store before you've proven you know how to run a single lemonade stand.
Exactly. You stick to the shoes until the shoes are an undeniable, profitable success.
And as you navigate those early sales, making those minor pivots and disciplined expansions, You have to anchor your daily decisions in your core values.
The sources note a fascinating trend in longitudinal business studies regarding this.
The one major characteristic consistent across almost every business that survives and thrives long past its inception is a strict adherence to stated core values.
Yes.
The sources use Disney as a phenomenal example of this. When you look at Disney's corporate framework, their stated core purpose is not to make the maximum amounts of money producing cartoons.
Right.
Their core purpose is to bring happiness to millions.
And that specific value dictates the mechanics of the company. It dictates the absurd level of detail in their theme parks, how they train their staff to interact with guests, and the emotional resonance of their films.
If your only core value is maximizing profit, you will eventually make a short-term decision to cut a corner, which ruins the product, which eventually kills the company.
Core values act as your compass when the market gets chaotic. They dictate that you deliver actual value, that you treat your employees and your customers with respect, and that you honor your commitments.
And those behaviors build the long-term relationships and brand loyalty that sustain a business for decades.
Insulating you from short-term market fluctuations.
Okay, let's zoom out and summarize this entire journey for you, the listener.
Mhm.
If you are sitting there thinking about starting a business, what we've discovered today in this deep dive is that entrepreneurship is not about being a greedy caricature.
It's not.
And it is certainly not about sitting in a coffee shop waiting for a magical light bulb moment to strike.
It is a systematic process.
It requires adopting an internal locus of control, believing you are responsible for closing the gap between how things are and how they should be.
Utilizing the bird in your hand, calculating your affordable loss, and executing small, manageable steps from base camp.
You put the legal and financial armor in place to protect yourself, and then you step out into the real world to rigorously, humbly test your hypotheses against the demands of real customers.
It's a profound operational shift. And I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought based on everything we've unpacked today.
Oh, please do.
We've spent this entire deep dive talking about applying these frameworks, calculating affordable loss, utilizing the resources currently in your hand, treating growth as a disciplined experiment, all to starting a formal commercial business.
Right.
But what if you applied that exact same entrepreneurial mindset to your own life?
Oh, wow.
What would happen if you treated your career trajectory, your daily habits, or even your creative pursuits as a startup? Something that needed to be shielded from catastrophic risk, innovated, tested against reality, and constantly optimized.
I see what you mean.
Could you become the entrepreneur of your own life?
I absolutely love that reframing because whether you are launching a tech platform, opening a neighborhood bakery, or just trying to build a more intentional, purpose-driven life, the mechanism is the same.
It really is.
You cannot just stand on the ground staring up at the mountain, debating the minutia of the climb. You have to pack your gear, check your assumptions, and take that very first step out of base camp.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.